Good experiencing to you. Welcome to the first of two all-binaural broadcasts for headphone listening. If my voice sounds a little different, it's probably because you're listening to this program on loudspeakers. And if my voice sounds a lot different, like I'm standing right in front of you out here in my backyard, outdoors, speaking directly to you from about 2 to 3 feet away, then you're wearing stereo headphones. That's what you should be doing if you want to re-experience all the you are there effects of the music and sounds on today's special program. You'll get a hint of what's going on via speakers if you sit in the middle, equidistant between them, and quite close to them. We're going to sample a pre-release of a brand new symphonic binaural recording of the Sassaw Organ Symphony today. George Mester conducting the Pasadena Symphony. Maestro Mester will then be my interview guest for the week, preempting the interview I'd originally scheduled. Other music in binaural sound will include improvisations for organ, sax, and guitar, a movement of Telemann played by a folk group, some nature environments from the sound tracker Gordon Hempton, a pipe organ work by Jean Langlais, and both a big band and a steel band recorded by yours truly. So snap on your headphones for this week's all-binaural broadcast. Stereo sound is great, but there's something better. It's even more realistic, and you can listen to it anywhere. It's binaural sound, audio recorded just for playback on headphones. Tiny microphones inserted into a dummy head right where your ears would be, pick precisely the same sound patterns that you would hear. Binaural sound is more exciting and a lot more accurate than stereo sound because your ears can't get confused. You probably won't believe the realism until you try it. Well, those were not my words. They're a direct quote from the syndicated columnist on High End, Al Fassold, who writes for the Newhouse News Service. So try it already, okay? No one else in the world is doing an entire hour of binaural material on the air on a regular basis, such as you're hearing on Audiophile Audition. So take advantage of it. Now, when you're trying it, it's very important to keep the signals for your two ears separated and going to the correct ears. In other words, the signal from the left ear of the dummy head has to arrive at your left ear and vice versa. Reverse them and the binaural effect is seriously compromised. Why's that? Well, ever notice that the front of your head looks quite different from the back of your head? That's the reason. So now, if everything's correct, you should be hearing me in your left ear. And now, as I move again around the front of your head, you should be hearing me in your right ear. If that's not the case, just reverse the headphones on your head or the two connections at your receiver, tuner, or whatever. Let's begin our binaural experiences with some thrilling pipe organ. This is a binaural recording made just last year using the latest and most advanced professional dummy head, the Aachen Head Acoustics System. It has a frequency response down to DC, transformerless mics, and it's specially equalized for completely compatible playback on loudspeakers. In fact, quite a bit of the sonic realism of the binaural version will come across on good speakers if you sit equidistant in front of them, but it won't transport you sonically to Spivey Hall in Murrow, Georgia, where this was taped. Here is Joyce Jones at the Ruffati organ in Fête Festival by Jean Langlais. Fête by Jean Langlais, with Joyce Jones at the Ruffati organ of Spivey Hall at Clayton State College in Georgia. Wade Bray was the recording engineer, using the Head Acoustics binaural system. 10 selections from Bach and Haydn to Rieger and Dupre are on this CD on Rosenhaus Records. The lead performer on our second binaural example had this to say about why she chose to do it this way. We didn't set out to be acoustical purists or anything like that. We were just simply blown away by how good everything sounded when we used this mic technique. It captures the sounds of the instruments interacting with the room rather than the sound just coming from the instruments. The simplicity of this recording style can also make you feel kind of naked. That was Frida Epstein of Frida and Acoustic Attitude, a folk-based trio, who you'll now hear in an interesting medley of a movement from the Canonic Sonata in G major by Telemann, plus the folk song Black Hawthorn. You have experienced the musical talents of Frida and Acoustic Attitude. That's spelled A-T-T-A, capital T-U-D-E. They did a medley of the Telemann Canonic Sonata Allegro movement, plus the folk song Black Hawthorn. They were recorded on the campus of the University of Virginia using the Aachen Head mic system. Their album is titled Midnight at Cabell Hall, and it's on Red House Records. Before we go on to our next sound experiences in binaural, I thought I'd give you a little sample of some sound experiences right out here in my own patio. The first one is over in this corner, and it sounds something like this. The other one is over here, a little further away, and sounds like this. Sort of a Zen gong. Now we're going to have 3 minutes worth of sound experiences from a virtual audio CD sampler. The first one is what might be called a sound effect. The other two are more musical. You know, the more realistic that a dummy head is, the more realistic is the sound pickup during binaural recording. I usually put a beret on the bald pate of my own dummy head, the back of whose head to whom I'm talking right now, because then it sounds more natural. Most of us have some hair up there, and that hair absorbs and reflects the many sounds that strike our heads. Some of the dummy heads even include shoulders and torso under the head because of the natural sound reflections that they create. But back to the hair, because this first sound is all about getting that hair nice and clean. Then we'll all experience some percussive sounds that will pass over our now clean heads and to the back of us. Finally, we'll sample a track that's titled merely Violin Practice.
Is that alright? How does the water feel? Not too hot? Just shout if it gets too hot, okay? Now I'll just put a little bit of conditioner on just to come out the tangles, and then be all set ready. Okay, that should do it.
Well, whether you're using loudspeakers or headphones, you may notice that we're now indoors in my studio. This may be California, but after all, it's Northern California, and this is January. First, we heard there a shampoo, then percussion over the head, and finally someone practicing their violin. These were the sounds in binaural from the Virtual Audio Sampler. It's a budget line 32-track introduction to binaural music and sounds, also recorded with the Aachen head. It's from Heyday Records here in San Francisco, and it also includes the sound tour of San Francisco I aired on the last all-binaural broadcast. I'm John Sunier, and with me you're experiencing this week's edition of Audiophile Audition, which is the first of my 2 annual all-binaural broadcasts for headphone listening. I have preempted the interview originally scheduled in order to air the even more pertinent one that I taped at a very exciting recording session in Pasadena last November. It was with conductor George Mester, who had just led the Pasadena Symphony in the second of 2 recording sessions for the first commercial binaural recording of a full symphony orchestra made in the U.S. It will be issued in late spring on the new Auricle label, A-U-R-I-C-L-E. We'll hear a preview of that exciting recording following the interview. Now, this is the only portion of today's special program that was not recorded with an actual binaural dummy head. It was taped with a tiny stereo mic with the 2 elements about a ½ inch apart. If you were, say, a mouse, perhaps the spacing would give you a realistic binaural effect, but then you'd need really tiny headphones. You know, some older binaural recordings have been made without a head, just 2 microphones about 7 inches apart to match the spacing of our ears, and sometimes a small baffle between them. But the best results are achieved with artificial heads. Anyway, here is my chat with George Mester. I began by asking Maestro Mester how long he's been with the Pasadena Symphony.
This is my 10th season with the Pasadena Symphony. 10 years of ecstasy, musical ecstasy. This orchestra is just such a magnificent instrument with some of the best players in the world, people who not only are totally flexible, great musicians, but also eager to have a wonderful musical experience. That's an unusual combination, so I feel blessed.
And this is your first recording session with them, is that right?
Yes, and I always knew that it was going to be an easy experience because that's all they do all their lives. So
right.
that
They're nearly all Hollywood studio musicians.
yes, so they're all hot, and so a microphone does not in any way intimidate them.
Mm-hmm. This recording session certainly went faster and smoother than many I've been to.
Well, it was magic from the beginning to the end.
You came here directly from the Louisville?
No, actually, I left Louisville Orchestra in 1979, and I started here 10 years ago, 1983, so I think there was a 4-year hiatus. Mm-hmm. And, of course, I did 72 records in Louisville. They were not binaural, of course.
Yes. Well, I've aired some of them, enjoyed them very much, and I noticed they're still being distributed and continuing that series. How did their accent on encouraging contemporary music performance and recording so much, how did that begin?
Well, the mayor of Louisville back in the late 1940s, his name was Charles Farnsley. He thought that the image of Louisville, which was horses, booze, and tobacco, needed some upgrading, and so he came up with this beautiful idea, and together with my predecessor and the founder of the orchestra, Robert Whitney, came upon a plan to raise funds and commission composers from all over the world to write pieces specifically for premiere in Louisville, Kentucky. And the Rockefeller Foundation gave $1 million towards this. That amount was matched in Louisville, or it's pronounced Louisville.
Right.
And they started doing 12 records a year as soon as the music started coming in from Hindemith and Piston. Those are the great composers of the period. And so when the money ran out for commissioning, it was pretty much about the same time that I arrived in Louisville. And so then what my job was is to find music that had never been recorded, because the whole philosophy of the recording company, which was owned and continues to be owned by Louisville, it's called First Edition Records.
Right.
The whole philosophy was that this would be first recordings.
Right.
So then my job, which I think was actually more difficult, was I had to find the music that should be recorded. It was my job to identify it and put it on record. My philosophy was that I did not want any of my biases to be obvious to any record collector, and so I chose music from every the wide spectrum of musical styles. I felt that my job was as an archivist and not as a taste trend maker.
And was this pace of 12 a year still released?
No, in fact, by the time I got there, it was only 6 a year, thank God. Otherwise, I would have been dead by now.
And how many have been released all together over the years?
Well, all 72 records. I stayed there 12 years, and I did 6 records a year. Now, they were all released. Originally, they were monaural. This is Then it was also stereo, playable on monaural equipment. Then, since I left, of course, they went into CDs, and they've repackaged records. Some of my recordings have been issued together with recordings by other conductors, and many of the titles that I did are no longer available.
I really enjoyed some of those early mono ones. I should see if they've been reissued. Did you find this recording session for binaural different in any way from the work you had to do with recording with Louisville?
No, in fact, I think one of the things I really liked about our recordings in Louisville and this recording now with the Pasadena Symphony was the thing they had in common is that we used to do very long takes. I don't like micro editing. And so very often some of the records that we put out in Louisville were just one take, very, very long take, and a couple of shorter takes edited in. And so that way you can get a sweeping kind of view of the piece.
Right, right. I was thinking today if somebody heard some of the take numbers, like hearing take 32, that doesn't mean 32 at one spot. It might be 2 or 3 at one spot, and then you move to another spot where there's a problem, and the numbers just keep. That's not very many takes.
No, it's actually it was a minimal thing. I remember some sessions I've had in other places, 122, it gets really exhausting.
The musicians seem to enjoy the experience of coming back and putting on headphones and hearing the results.
Well, it's an unusual thing to hear a full orchestra on a monaural recording, so this is a historic moment.
Never really realized how much noise the air from the organ made because you're so much more aware of that with headphones than with the loudspeakers.
Well, one of the real shockers always at the beginning of a recording session, especially if you've done a concert before, is how much noise there actually is that you have to be careful about.
Yes. Well, some performances of both these works for organ and symphony, haven't they added the organ later because they didn't have it in the hall?
Yeah, and it never works. Right. It sounds awful.
Yes.
That was my interview with George Mester, current conductor of the Pasadena Symphony Orchestra. Now we're in for a real treat. I have a preview DAT of the Sassaw Organ Symphony, which is one of the 2 blockbusters that Maestro Mester recorded binaurally. The other one was Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra. Not only were the Hollywood studio musicians in the orchestra the last word in performers, but the recording equipment was also the last word in audio. The latest model Neumann dummy head, Fritz for short, was used. It has enhanced speaker playback compatibility. It was hung about 15 feet behind the podium and about 15 feet up from the floor. The signal was routed to a Sonic Solutions real-time digital recording system, which outputted a 20-bit data stream, which was then stored not on DAT or on recordable CD, but on computer hard drive. I should say hard drives, because although these hard drives were 2400 meg capacity, 20-bit data requires twice as much storage space as ordinary 16-bit recording. So each hard drive only held an hour and 20 minutes. And during a recording session, that time goes by awfully fast. You'll hear some blower noise coming from the organ pipes on the left side of the Pasadena Civic Auditorium. It's a classic organ that was originally installed for the theater organist Reginald Fort. The organist is Hector Oliveira. Here is George Mester conducting the Pasadena Symphony in the portion that audiophiles know as the bassy part. from Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony No. 3 in C minor, the final movement. The organist was Hector Oliveira, and George Mester conducted the Pasadena Symphony in the last movement of the Symphony No. 3, the Organ Symphony, by Camille Saint-Saëns. Critic R.D. Darrell observed that few other symphonic works more richly illustrate the art of sound weaving in its dual aspects of instrumentation and orchestration. And binaural reproduction helps the listener to sort out that complex sound weaving with greater ease than any stereo recording via speakers could possibly achieve. This album will make a start at answering the requests of binaural fans for full symphonic recordings. It will be the first in a series on the new Oracle label, which will be a gold audiophile CD sublabel of the well-known Newport Classics Company. On most of my binaural broadcasts, I try to air some original, non-commercial binaural recordings. This week, there's time for just one, and it's one of my own. I taped the Waldo Carter Big Band rehearsing on a small stage in an empty nightclub. You're standing very close to the front row of saxes.
1, 2, 3.
Well, now we must leave the crowded binaural stage populated by the Waldo Carter Big Band, recorded by yours truly. Come August, you'll be able to experience a second one of these binaural broadcasts for headphone listening, such as we did today. Good experiencing to you. It's time again to snap on those headphones and come with me for an hour to a massive quantity of sonic and musical environments. It's the second annual all-binaural broadcast for headphone listening. If you have headphones someplace but not readily at hand, I suggest you go find a pair to plug them in. If that takes too long and you have a recorder of some type, tape this hour and then you can experience it later at your leisure. If you don't have any stereo headphones at all, but if you do have separate speakers that you can move without suffering injury to yourself, I suggest you move them so they're pointing at each other and you are sitting or lying down in between them. If you can't do any of these things, well, just relax and enjoy the program anyway, because everything you'll hear is compatible for playback by ordinary loudspeakers. You just won't experience the sounds as though you were there wherever they originated. We're going to have music of Bach, Vierne, Ibert, Pisculi, Sardaby and Alexander, Brenda Wilde, and the Imperial Bells of China. There will be pipe organ, flute, harp, pedal harpsichord, duo pianos, bells, and sounds of the Australian outback. All the CDs heard today but one are or will be available, and we'll have information about that later on. On the audio news section, I'll fill you in on some upcoming binaural activity around the world. By the way, I'm coming to you in binaural too, and you may notice I'll be moving around the room occasionally, and you may hear some outside sounds because my window is open. Just a second, one of my mic cables is a bit loose here. Let me tape it up a bit. There we go. Nothing like that old duct tape, just like Garrison says. Okay, we need to begin with some basics now for those entirely new to the world of binaural reproduction. 200 million stereo headphones have been sold in the past decade, but nearly everyone that's listening to them is listening to recordings that were designed for playback by speakers, not headphones. That's why it all sounds like it's going on inside your skull, with half the band crowded in one ear and the other half crowded at the other ear, with a major abyss in between. Binaural broadcasts and recordings, on the other ear, are designed for listening on headphones, in fact, primarily for that purpose. They do this by maintaining two separate channels of audio all the way from the original recording site to your own ears. There's no mixing, and between the original recording system and your headphones, no other special equipment of any kind. The original system is usually what's called an artificial head or dummy head. It replicates an average human head with all the features, including even often the torso. In the ears of the dummy head are two tiny, sensitive, omnidirectional microphones. Basically, that's it right there. Now, since the front of your head, and everybody else's, is quite different from the back, it's vital to maintain the integrity of the left and right signals all the way from the dummy head to your head. This means if the left ear signal goes to your right ear and vice versa, the binaural effect will be quite seriously flawed. So now, you should be hearing me over here in your left ear. And now, over in your right hand, pink shell-like protuberance. If you find that everything's reversed, just reverse your headphones on your head, or if they're the type that don't fit properly that way, reverse the two connections somewhere along the way from your tuner to your headphones. Now let me get out my measuring tape and check the distance here. I should be just about 2 feet away from you, which I am right now, and at this point directly in front of you. Now, if we were in another country, for example, Arabia, I might be about a foot from you, like this. And if I'm up here really in your face, practically touching your nose, I sound like this, and that wouldn't be very comfortable because that's sort of invading your space. So I'll move back here to a more normal distance. Oh, you're going to do that now? Okay.
You were finishing your chair.
Should I lift my legs? Okay, now that we have a clean chamber, how about a pair of chamber music selections in binaural? Number 1 is a tuneful entr'acte for flute and harp by Jacques Ibert. Number 2 is a medley of big hits from operas by Bellini, titled Omaggio a Bellini. Pisculli is the composer, arranger, and so on. For it, the flute will be replaced by an English horn, and the harp will stay right about where it is. In fact, it's the same harpist in both selections. I'll credit the performers afterwards. Well, are we having a musical experience yet? The first of those 2 binaural duos was an entr'acte for flute and harp by Jacques Ibert. The performers were Gabi Pa van Riet, flute, and Rennie Yamahata, harp. That's on a CD titled Green Sleeves, Flute and Harp, and it's on Audio Stacks. Then, with Mr. Yamahata in place, English horn player Dietheim Jonas stepped up to the harp and was heard in Pisculli's Omaggio a Bellini, a medley of melodies from Bellini operas. That one is also on Audio Stacks, and it's titled Opera Fantasies. Oboe and piano are featured on some of its 7 tracks. For this week's audio news, I thought it Whoop! Excuse me. Hello, you're on Audiophile Candid Audition. Oh, aluminum siding? I don't think so. Thank you. As I was saying, for this week's audio news, I thought it appropriate to cover some of the recent activity in the field of binaural. There have been some excellent reviews of binaural recordings recently in both Hi-Fi News and Fanfare magazines. My most recent article on binaural, an introduction to the same, appeared in the January-February issue of Positive Feedback magazine. Details on all 3 of these sources are in our audio bibliography, which we'll send out to listeners who specifically request it. The increased emphasis in audio research on psychoacoustics has created a renewed interest in binaural reproduction. With many avenues for tying in with computers, the new terminology often used is virtual audio to partner with virtual reality. But it's still binaural, and you can bet that most virtual reality programs are going to be making use of some variant of binaural. Both of the manufacturers of the 2 professional binaural mic systems, Neumann and Aachen Head Acoustics, have made further improvements in the latest models of their artificial heads to improve both the total realism of the binaural experience with headphones and at the same time to achieve total compatibility for loudspeaker playback. In this way, 2 inventories of commercial recordings will not be required. Another development by both of the firms revolves around special binaural mixing consoles. Those complex consoles will allow producers of commercial recordings to mix multiple tracks, whether recorded in mono, stereo, or true binaural, and end up with a 2-channel final master that is completely binaural. This opens the way for creative pop production that has often used the studio and its various equipment as an instrument in creating a special sonic environment, rather than following the purest live-to-2-track approach of audiophile jazz and classical recording. As many as 32 channels can now be mixed by the Aachen BMC board, with speaker-compatible result that creates an impressive 3-dimensional auditory experience, just like the ones you're experiencing today on this special binaural edition of Audiophile Audition. Here's some of the binaural recording activity that's going on now or planned. Marco Polo Records will be taping either a Mahler or Bryan symphony in the British Isles soon for a compatible binaural release. That may be the first of many on that label. 3D Productions in Baton Rouge is starting a label of Cajun music in binaural. George Harrison and Quincy Jones recently did some binaural taping in Hollywood for a future album. In November, I hope to be present at a binaural recording session with the Pasadena Symphony for Newport Classics Records. The planned CD of works of Saint-Saëns and Richard Strauss will be the initial release of a brand new all-binaural record label. It'll be called Auricle, A-U-R-I-C-L-E. That's it for the audio news this week, and now back to more music in binaural. You may notice I'm now in a different room of the house. However, this being a rather old house, it has a rather squeaky floor, so I don't think we'll stay here for long. I recall when stereo entered the scene in the 50s, it was at first regarded as superfluous for solo instruments such as guitar, piano, or pipe organ. Well, the truth is, it would be very difficult to find a less solo instrument than the pipe organ, especially some of the monsters with thousands of pipes and even additional consoles strung out all over a huge reverberating cathedral space. The added clarity of stereo aided in cleaning up the muddy mono reproduction and in separating the reverb from the original notes. But binaural puts the listener right in the pew of that cathedral. Perhaps that's why there are a preponderance of binaural pipe organ recordings. Here's an example. A toccata by Louis Vierne, played by Thierry Meckler on the grand organs of St. Mark's Church in Wiesbaden, Germany. A toccata by Louis Vierne, played by Thierry Meckler on the organs of St. Mark's Church in Wiesbaden. That's from a CD on the Motet label that's titled Symphonic Organ Music. Big sounding works from 5 different composers, ranging from Liszt through Messiaen. Like the others heard today, it's available from the binaural source. Now, before leaving the left side of this hour and moving over into the right side of the hour, let me tell you that I'm John Sunier, and this is Audiophile Audition, the weekly hour for audio buffs and music lovers. This week I'm coming to you binaurally because this is one of my 2 yearly all-binaural broadcasts. Good experiencing to you. That music by Claude Bowling brings us another hour of the weekly program for music lovers and audio buffs, Audiophile Audition. I'm your host, John Sunier. This week's edition is something a bit different from my usual fare. It's my twice-annual all-binaural broadcast, especially for headphone listening. I'm standing in front of my binaural recording head Oscar right now. So if you have headphones and can plug them into your receiver or tuner, please do so. If you don't, but you do have a cassette, tape recorder, or hi-fi video recorder, you might want to tape this hour-long program for later listening on headphones, or just plug your headphones into the recorder and listen now. If you don't have any headphones, please don't go away, because this program will still be enjoyable, just not quite as enjoyable as with stereo headphones. Debussy's Gollywog's Cakewalk has started off the musical part of Audiophile Audition's all-binaural broadcast. You were seated in a jazz coffee house in San Rafael, California, listening to a sax quintet that calls themselves the Sax Maniacs. Doug Delaney arranged that number for the group, who generally play modern jazz. I was really pleased that the Maniacs eschewed the club's PA system, because with binaural recording, you preserve a really realistic impression of the PA system and not of the actual acoustic sounds that you just heard. By the way, I'm scratching on top of Oscar's head right now, and if my voice sounds a little bit strange, it's because I'm standing behind Oscar. Here I'm moving down his head, down his very bald pate to his left ear and scratching the top of it, and now across the top of the head to the right ear and scratching across the top of it. And it's a test of whether you have your left and right earpieces on properly. This is the second movement of Dvorak's Fifth Symphony, with Vladimir Zhirov conducting the Plovdiv Philharmonic Orchestra. It's one of two new binaural CDs of a full symphony orchestra. That's something that we haven't yet had in the slowly expanding library of binaural software. It was recorded by Bulgarian engineer Peter Kunchev in Bulgaria using a system of his own design. Instead of giving you my usual explanation of binaural at this time, I thought I'd use Mr. Kunchev's own short note which accompanies this CD. It was printed in Bulgaria. Man's hearing is binaural and enables the definition of a sound source. The spatial hearing can be explained by the differences in the loudness and the time of arrival of the sound at the two ears. With the binaural sound recording system, a special mic technique called artificial head is used. It preserves all the components of the sound signal, such as frequency and time differences for the signals coming from various directions to the microphones. The natural dynamic range and balance of the sound picture are thus preserved during the recording. The natural acoustic environment is also truthfully represented, which is so far impossible with other known methods. The artificial effects and subjective equalization of the signal are avoided. A natural and truthful reproduction is aimed at. This recording can be played on stereophonic two-channel equipment, and the normal stereophonic effect is achieved. However, when high-quality stereophonic headphones are used for the reproduction of this recording, a full binaural effect is achieved, and the reproduction is three-dimensional, with a particularly truthful representation of the timbres of the different musical instruments and their accurate position in space. The listener is present at the venue in the event, in the concert hall. Those notes about binaural were from Peter Kunchev, the recording engineer who designed the dummy head used in that recording of Dvorak's Fifth Symphony. It filled out the album with the same composer's Hutsika Overture on a Laserlight CD. If you happen to pick up that bargain CD at a store, you should know that it strangely says nothing about it being binaural, but it is. Guess there's no disguising my turning the page at this point. Continuing now with our all-binaural audiophile audition special. I have a trio of summer sounds for you. In the center will be harpist Thomas Breckheimer playing the Irish harp. First I'd said Irish harpist Thomas Breckheimer, but that didn't quite sound right. He'll play Summer Will Come, and then the music selection will be framed by some familiar summer sounds in binaural.
Unfortunately.
I'm sitting down now and you're still standing up. Can you tell? Thomas Breckheimer played the Irish harp in Summer Will Come. That's one of 41 separate tracks, not all of them binaural, however, on the CD Staccato Special. It's from the German audio label. That's the German audio magazine who also put out recordings. Before and after the music, you heard some binaural sounds that were taped by a listener, Sam Gaylord of Petoskey, Michigan. The first one was obviously a tennis court, and the second was sitting on the side of a riverbank in northern Michigan with a barnfly buzzing about your head occasionally. Thanks to Mr. Gaylord for those sounds. You're experiencing Audiophile Audition with me, John Sunier. It's the weekly ear-stretching trip for both sound and classical music lovers. This week is the second of my twice-yearly all-binaural broadcasts. Next week, we have a look at another somewhat technical aspect of sound, the reproduction of that lowest octave of the frequency spectrum via the use of subwoofer speakers. Most of the music on the program will demonstrate the floor-shaking lower frequencies. In spite of where I'm located, I'll try to avoid the non-musical floor-shaking frequencies. Works of Stravinsky, Vaughan Williams, Nell Ibel, and Alec Wilder will be among those heard, and that's a Wilder piece for tuba in the background right now. The talk will be by John Searing of Audio Magazine about the use of subwoofers. So join me for What's Shaking next week on a subwoofer special. This recording didn't use a complete binaural dummy head, but I think you'll find it extremely realistic via headphones. It was made by Don Osaski Audio Recordings, and Don used a pair of B&K 4009 Omni mics with nose cones, and they were mounted on a bar 9 inches apart. The usual spacing on a dummy head is about 7 inches to match the human ears. No mic preamps were used at all. The signals went directly to the DAT recorder. We are in the Basilica next to San Francisco's Mission Dolores, and we'll hear the Gloria a Dios movement from the well-known Misa Criolla by Ramirez. The Coro Hispano de San Francisco and the Conjunto Nuevo Mundo are directed by Juan Pedro Gaffney, and the soloists are Mark Hernandez, tenor, and Marcos Arcornero, baritone.
Alturas, y en la tierra, a los hombres,
We've heard a live recording by Don Osowski of the Gloria a Dios section of the Missa Criolla of Ramirez. We heard the Coro Hispano de San Francisco and the Conjunto Nuevo Mundo directed by Juan Pedro Gaffney. Thanks to Don for that recording, which was done with two Omni mics spaced 9 inches apart and gave sort of a pseudo-binaural effect. You really don't need special headphones for binaural. You'll experience the effect with nearly all of them. Of course, just as with loudspeakers, the better quality the headphones, the better the sound.